Resetting the circadian clock leads to well-being and increased lifespan, whereas clock disruption is associated with aging and morbidity. Increased longevity and improved health can be achieved by different feeding regimes that reset the circadian rhythm, and this leads to better synchrony in metabolism and physiology. Life has evolved to thrive in Earth-specific environmental characteristics, of which cycles of sunlight and nighttime are particularly pervasive. So naturally, all living organisms are heavily influenced by the cycles. Humans are no exception. The most obvious example of the influence of dark light cycle is our sleep, but there's many other behaviours and biological functions that follow a similar rhythm, such as food intake, metabolism and blood pressure. In fact, most, if not all, bodily functions have some degree of day-night rhythmicity. These 24-hour cycles in biology and behaviour are called the circadian rhythms. The circadian timing system is our body's intrinsic timekeeping mechanism. It's what we usually call the biological clock, the clock that controls the rhythm of time-dependent biological processes. The science that studies these processes is called chronobiology. Just as we have diurnal, wakeful activity and feeding, and nocturnal, sleep, rest and fasting behaviours, so do our cells in our body have a biological day and a biological night. The circadian timing system is the biological pacemaker that regulates endocrine and metabolic rhythms to establish a coherent pattern of cellular activity. The biological clock coordinates interdependent pathways and functions. It separates in time incompatible pathways and functions, and it synchronizes our biology and our behavior with the environment. During the biological day, to promote wakefulness and support physical activity and feeding, the circadian timing system shifts the metabolism to a state of energy production and energy storage. It does this by favouring hormonal signals like increased insulin signalling and decreased leptin, and metabolic pathways that promote the use of nutrients like glucose and fatty acids to produce cellular energy in the form of ATP, and to replenish energy reserves in the form of glycogen and triglycerides. Conversely, during the biological night, the circadian timing system promotes sleep, and it shifts metabolism to a state of mobilization of the stored energy by favouring hormonal signals such as reduced insulin signaling and increased leptin, and metabolic pathways that break down the stored energy reserves and maintain the blood sugar levels. Time of day signaling by the circadian rhythm timing allows all cells and all systems like the nervous, cardiovascular, digestive, etc. to predict the cyclic changes in the environment, to anticipate imminent environmental, behavioural or biological patterns, and preemptively adapt to them. So, for example, when the sun sets, our tissues know that we'll soon get to sleep and be fasting, so energy will need to be pulled out of storage. Likewise, when the sun rises, our tissues know that we'll soon be awake and feeding, so some energy can be stored away to get us through the night. Every cell in our body has some type of autonomous clock, and this times their activities. In most cells, it's a set of genes called clock genes, and these control the rhythmic activity of other genes to time tissue-specific functions and to generate daily oscillations in cellular metabolism and function. But these tissue-specific clocks need to work coherently to maintain balance in the body. This coherence is created by a master clock in our brain that organizes all circadian processes. This central clock is located in a region of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Clock genes in the suprachiasmatic nucleus set the natural period of our biological clock. Although it's strikingly close to the 24-hour environmental period, on average around 24.2 hours, it's still different enough to allow for desynchronization from the environment. Therefore, it needs to be reset every day. This is done by light, the time giver that entrains our master clock to the environment. The suprachiasmatic nucleus receives input from neurons of the retina that contain a light-sensitive protein. These neurons, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, detect the levels of environmental light, and they reset the suprachiasmatic nucleus to synchronize it with the light and dark cycle. The suprachiasmatic nucleus can then entrain all cellular clocks to the light cycle. One of the main mechanisms of the whole body clock synchronization is through time of day dependent hormone signaling. The hormones can carry messages long distances through the blood, and therefore they play a key role in the communication system in circadian biology. There's two hormones that have a key role in the signaling: melatonin and cortisol. The hormone melatonin is a major signaling molecule of the circadian timing system. Melatonin is produced by the pineal gland in the circadian rhythm. It rises after sunset, the dim light melatonin onset. It peaks in the middle of the night between 2 and 4 a.m. and decreases gradually thereafter, dropping to very low levels during daylight hours. Melatonin production by the pineal gland is activated in the suprachiasmatic nucleus via the neuronal signaling pathway, and this is activated only at night. During daytime, light input from the retina inhibits the suprachiasmatic nucleus signaling to the pineal gland, and it stops the melatonin synthesis. Through this mechanism, the melatonin production is inhibited by light and enhanced by darkness. Pineal melatonin is released into the blood flow, and it reaches all tissues in the body, where it modulates the activity of the clock genes and acts as a time giver that signals darkness. Through its action in the brain and peripheral tissues, the melatonin promotes sleep, and it shifts our physiological processes into biological night in anticipation of a fasting period. One of the targets of melatonin is the suprachiasmatic nucleus itself, where it acts as a feedback signal that adjusts the rhythm of the central clock and keeps the whole system running in sync. Therefore, melatonin is a chronobiotic molecule, a molecule with the capacity to adjust, anticipate, or delay the phase of the biological clock. Melatonin's chronobiotic effects are vital for adequate daily rhythmicity of physiological and behavioral processes that are essential for our environmental adaptation. The hormone cortisol is mostly known for its action as a stress hormone, but it's also an important signaling molecule in the circadian timing system. Cortisol is produced by the mitochondria in the adrenal gland with a circadian rhythm that's controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Within the first hour after awakening, there's a sharp increase in the production of cortisol, the cortisol awakening response. Following the morning peak, the cortisol production decreases continuously throughout the day. Cortisol production is very low during the first half hour of sleep and then rises steadily during the second half. The surge in cortisol levels during dawn allows the body to anticipate that we'll soon wake up after fasting overnight and to prepare for physical activity and feeding. Cells respond by getting ready to process nutrients, respond to energy demands, and replenish energy reserves. The morning peak in cortisol secretion can be regarded as a kind of stress response to waking up that jump-starts our day. The spike in cortisol increases arousal. It initiates our biological day and activates our diurnal behaviours. Circadian rhythmicity is very elegantly regulated by the levels and type of light. For example, melatonin production is most markedly inhibited by bright blue light, in which morning light is enriched, and accordingly the cortisol awakening response is greater when there's exposure to blue light, specifically in the morning. Our body is optimized to follow the environmental 24-hour pattern, but technology and modern lifestyles have disrupted the pattern. Bright blue light is also a type of light that's emitted in high amounts by artificial light sources, including screens and energy-efficient light bulbs. Nocturnal exposure to these light sources can even, at relatively low intensities, such as a normally lit room, quickly inhibit the melatonin production. These artificial changes in the circadian rhythm system are not without consequences. Although the suprachiasmatic nucleus can reset fairly quickly in response to circadian disruption, peripheral organs are slower, and this can lead to a desynchrony with the environment if shifts in the light-dark cycle are repeated. Circadian disruption can have a negative impact on all types of biological processes. It can contribute to sleep disorders, metabolic and cardiovascular dysfunction, mood disorders, and other disruptions that affect our well-being. Shift workers are a common example of how serious a circadian mismanagement can be, and they show the misalignment of melatonin and cortisol, and they have an increased risk of developing cardiometabolic disease, cancer, gastrointestinal disorders, among other illnesses. To learn more about sleep, check out my website where you'll find videos on melatonin, herbs to help you sleep, and herbs to help to reduce cortisol levels. To book a consultation or learn about herbs, supplements, and natural treatments, check out my website.